Once again, it is the public presentation of the 2024 Executive Budget Proposal, earlier laid before the National Assembly by the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. It's a 27.5 trillion naira budget of renewed hope, and we know that it would work for us. We can't wait to know the proper breakdown, to know where it's going to. Eyes on the money. Eyes on the money. Nigerians, I know, eyes on the money. Media, we are tracking the money and ensuring that we get value for every earmarked naira and kobo. And hopefully, who knows, our hope will give birth to success and our prayers will be answered and Nigeria will work better for you and I. Thank you once again for your patience. We're still on to the activities here. I can see the Director General of the Budget Office putting heads together with the Minister of our host minister, the Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, because we don't want us asking questions that we know that we have answers to, and then when we give you the answers that are not in the book, you run a mill. I can imagine what Twitter is already saying: budget of renewed hope, hashtag budget of renewed hope, hashtag budget of renewed hope. But what is in the budget of renewed hope? It's now time. I think all the I's have been dotted and all the T's have been crossed. So join me, welcome to the microphone and the podium, the Honorable Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, Senator Abubakar Atiku Bagudu, CON, for the presentation of the 2024 Executive Budget Proposal to you Nigerians on site and everyone online. Please, a round of applause for him as we welcome him. I don't think the applause is welcoming enough, because if you don't welcome him, he might not just he will take his time. Can we make it better to show enthusiasm? Enthusiasm that we can't wait to see what is in the book. Your Excellency. You're welcome.
First, while my brother, the coordinating minister of the economy, Chief Oluwale Edun, who came to support all of us. And before he leaves, let me thank him and congratulate him as well, and appreciate his coming to encourage us. And we are no doubt that the Permanent Secretary, Federal Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning, the Chairman, Fiscal Responsibility Commission, Victor Monaco, DG, Budget Office, Ben Akabweze, Executive Secretary, Peter Dr. Chioma Ejikemi, and senior members of staff from both the Ministries of Budget and Economic Planning and Finance, members of the Nigerian media, stakeholders that are joining us online. A very good afternoon. The MC, a very good afternoon to all of you.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
That today, November 29th, 2023, President Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu presented to the National Assembly the 2024 budget proposal. And I will start by appreciating the National Assembly for the reception granted to Mr. President and his entourage. And in all the remarks that followed, they attested to the confidence they have in Mr. President and the renewed hope agenda. And equally, to appreciate all those who have worked so hard to put the 2024 budget together, particularly the Budget Office and all MDAs and indeed other stakeholders who were responsible for all this hard work. That today we were proud to accompany Mr. President to present. Mr. President, before I come to the presentation itself, Mr. President made the point that he was presenting this budget following almost 6 months of hard work, of taking measures consistent with the renewed hope agenda for which he campaigned and for which he was elected, which recognized that choices need to be made so that Nigeria can be better. Quite often those choices might require bold and courageous decisions which have been taken, but with the recognition that compensation has to be given to those in our society who are disproportionately affected by such choices. Not surprisingly, on the day he was sworn in, as we all know, Mr. President announced that fuel subsidy is gone, and equally granted independence to the Central Bank of Nigeria in the exercise of its exchange rate management function to regulate the exchange rate, while at the same time signing 2 executive orders in order to create a rule-based market which will respect contracts, and he emphasized to investors both local and around the world and other stakeholders that all contracts will be respected, including contracts in the foreign exchange market. Equally, Mr. President set up a committee to review the tax and fiscal framework so as to simplify our tax while generating more revenue. And in addition to all that, measures that have gone a long way in stabilizing the macroeconomic policy, Mr. President equally took the task of leading an investment drive across the world, Asia, Europe. As we speak, he's airbound again to the Middle East, all in his quest to ensure that we engage with investors. The capital that is all there around the world, he leads the effort to mobilize it for domestic investment, and the world is paying attention. So, and equally, Mr. President, upon swearing in, inherited an 819 billion naira supplementary appropriation, which was passed by the National Assembly but yet to be assented then by the then President. So, Mr. President renegotiated the supplementary appropriation, and with the support of the National Assembly, found therein 500 billion naira, which was used to support and provide palliatives following the withdrawal of petroleum subsidies. Equally, a supplementary budget was passed. A 2.17 trillion naira supplementary appropriation was passed to provide money to the defense sector, close to 600 billion naira, and also provide money for infrastructure, especially urgent infrastructure that needs to be dealt with before the onset of the next rainy season. And this is across the country, including the repairs of both mainland and eco bridges, as well as 100 billion to the Federal Capital Territory, also to support them in capital, in improving upon the capital Equally, about 600 billion was provided for promise keeping, 400 billion being wage award, and another 100 billion to supplement what was in the 2023 appropriation, so as to provide enough money to meet the 35,000 wage awards announced to Nigerian workers. So today's presentation of the 2024 budget, as in the presentation itself, and as mentioned by Mr. President, is taking place in a world undergoing so much economic turbulence, where the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank had to adjust gross expectation for 2024. So this budget was prepared against the backdrop of the challenging global and domestic economic environment, slowing global growth, persistent inflationary pressures prompting monetary tightening, with the inherent negative impact on capital inflow to emerging markets. Interest rates in the industrialized world have gone up significantly, in some countries by upwards of 300%. Constrained investment spending, conflicts, geopolitical tension that is impacting both energy prices and global food supply. Next slide, please. The budget presentation, the document started with domestic factors. In addition to those international environment, also domestic factors impacting on the medium-term fiscal outlook included domestic revenue mobilization efforts, public debt sustainability concern, elevated inflation, and the urgency of dealing with issues that are challenging the domestic business environment, infrastructure, foreign exchange rate, and even in spite of the commendable effort by the security agencies, pockets of insecurity that are causing discord and limiting investments. The Nigerian economy posted positive but lower than expected growth for the 12th consecutive quarter, despite several headwinds. Real GDP growth, a measure that is used by countries to compare globally accepted measure to compare one country with other, showed that the real economy grew by 2.5% in the third quarter of 2023, slightly higher than 2.25% recorded in the second quarter of 2022. The growth performance was driven largely by the sustained non-export growth. In fact, the World Bank recently lowered its 2023 GDP growth for Nigeria from 3 to 2.5. However, our National Bureau of Statistics is still optimistic that we will achieve 3.5. The IMF projects global growth to fall from 3.5 in 2022 to 3.0 in 2023 and 2.9 in 2024. This, among others, contributory factors is that countries are facing so much turbulence. The United States economy, for example, is projected to decline from 2.1% growth in 2022 to 1.5% in 2024. Equally, the European countries are witnessing tepid growth, as well as growth in sub-Saharan Africa. So the 2024 budget estimate of the MDS was prepared taking due cognizance of the long-term vision that we have, the Agenda 2050, as well as the National Development Plan, the renewed hope agenda of the present administration, the 8-point priorities areas derived from the renewed hope agenda, as well as strategies that were captured in the approved medium-term and expenditure framework, as well as the fiscal policy paper. Hence, the budget reflects the renewed hope agenda of the present administration, aimed at addressing current fiscal challenges and to improve domestic economic conditions in such a way that Nigerians will renew their hope and others, particularly investors, will renew their confidence in our country. And with the steps taken, we are seeing light at the end of the tunnel. Sectoral allocations reflect government's desire to promote the achievement of the 8 priority areas: agriculture and food security, poverty reduction, job creation and economic growth, inclusivity, providing access to capital to our teeming populace, as well as enhancing security, accountability, and domestic resilience. And those measures are such that they will incentivize the private investment, debottle public service, and accelerate economic growth. The budget signals the administration's commitment to prudent fiscal management and the economic reforms necessary for unlocking the opportunities in our economy. We have to take measures that the world will believe we are serious, because that is what will bring the world to Nigeria. We are in competition with other countries. The budget presentation gave a detailed performance of 2022 budget parameters, but I will skip that because it's going to be available for members of the media that might, and all stakeholders, because this will be available online. But just to show that in 2022, say that in 2022, because the fuel subsidy regime that was in operation then, fuel subsidy alone costed the country about 4.1 trillion. The performance of the economy will no doubt be limited by such distortions in the economy. Equally, in 2003, where the benchmark was $75 to a barrel and 1.69 million barrels per day was forecasted, as well as exchange rate of 435. This is before June 2023, when the Central Bank of Nigeria adopted market-based exchange rate determination, inflation of 17.1 and GDP growth of 3.75. The actual are indicated there. So far to date, the average oil price has been $81.22. The oil production has not met the expectation, still a little bit upwards of 1.33. The average exchange rate for the year, we have to be careful here, because what the budget office did was to take the whole year and average out the exchange rate. So the average exchange rate was 601. It's much lower than the current exchange, but it's an average, as well as inflation of 27.33% and GDP 2.51. 2.51. The aggregate federal government revenue for 2023 was estimated at 11 trillion and 45 billion. This was to finance a budget. Sorry, I will take that again. The 2023 revenue performance of the 11 trillion 45 billion expected as revenue in 2023, 8 trillion 653 have been achieved by September. And when the pro rata is taken, it shows the performance, the commendable performance, where the pro rata revenue expected between January to September of 8.2 trillion has been exceeded by the actual collection of 8.6. Over the aggregate expenditure for the 2023 budget is 24 trillion 823 billion and 52 million. This included the two supplementary appropriations, and the pro rata revenue expected between January to September is 18 trillion 617 billion 64 million. However, only the sum of 12 trillion 700 billion and 94 million has been realized, which shows a variance of minus 31%. All the ratios follow similar trend. The aggregate expenditure has an pro rata spending target of 18.6 trillion as at the end of September. However, the actual spending was 12.7 trillion. Of this 12.7 trillion, 5.79 was for debt service, 3.78 for personnel cost, including pensions and gratuities. Only about 1.47, 25% of the pro rata budget has been released for MDS capital expenditure as at September 2023. However, this needs to be explained because the federal government adopted what is called a bottom-up cash plan rather than releasing money periodically to the MDS. The MDS are invited to do all the processing, award, and request money when they actually need cash backing. So the fiscal balance, meaning the difference between revenue and what was required to finance the budget of 2023, was 13.79 trillion. That takes me to the 2024, starting with the medium-term as expenditure projections. you may wonder, maybe some of you may wonder why Victor Monaco is here. The budget process is even guided by legislation, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which created the Fiscal Responsibility Commission. And part of the demands of that law legislation is that the federal government should submit to the National Assembly ahead of the presentation of a budget, a medium-term expenditure framework, and a fiscal policy statement. And this was done, and it was approved commendably by the National Assembly. And the benchmark that was approved by the National Assembly was $73.96 and an exchange rate of 700 as requested then by the executive. However, in consideration of the final budget which was presented today and international development, the international as well as the domestic policy, domestic economy, a revised benchmark of $77.96 million, $4 higher than what was presented before, and an exchange rate of 750 naira more than 700 that was approved before, were submitted by His Excellency Mr. President alongside the budget presented today. The inflation is projected at 21.4% in 2024, before declining to 20.3 and 18.6 in 2025 and 2026. The total Federation account revenue is projected to increase to 26.62 trillion in 2024, up from 11.86 trillion projected in 2023. Federation account is the money that is shared between the three tiers of government: federal, states, and local governments. However, the exchange rate effect, due to exchange rate effect, higher oil production, and the removal subsidy, the revenue that are responsible for the increase in projected revenue. Overview of the, can you go to the next slide, please? The 2024 Federal Government of Nigeria revenue is projected at 18.32 trillion, which is 7.28 trillion, or 66% more than that of the 2023 budget. The projections, including the different classes, including non-oil, oil and non-oil, dividends, independent revenue, and education tax, electronic money transfer, and drawdown from special accounts. Next slide, please. Next. So because of this, the federal government of Nigeria's aggregate expenditure is estimated at 27.5 trillion. This is 10.8% higher than the 2023 cumulative aggregate expenditure contained in the three budgets. The 2024 expenditure estimate includes statutory transfers as required by law. This is monies to different bodies that are determined by law, amounting to 1.3 trillion. However, I must add that in that 1.3 trillion, over 900 billion is capital spending. The provision of 8.25 trillion and 243 billion has been made for debt service and sinking fund to retire maturing bonds. This deserves a comment because the 8.25 trillion debt service came about because of the decision by the country to absorb the 22 trillion naira ways and means, which was the borrowing by the federal government from the Central Bank of Nigeria and made it into a national debt. So even at 9%, 22 trillion is about 2 trillion. So that added to the debt service, and the 243 is a sinking fund where money is kept aside for the payment of debt, not just interest. A total of 6.48 trillion is provided for personnel and pension costs, an increase of 576 billion or 9.8% over the 2023 provision. The budget has made adequate provision, 1 trillion naira provision for increases in MDAs, cost, personnel cost, wage awards, and personnel-related cost. The aggregate amount available for capital expenditure in the 2024 budget is 8.7 trillion, higher than the 2023 combined capital of 8.43 trillion. The 8.7 trillion includes capital of the statutory bodies to whom 1.3 trillion was being transferred. Next slide, please. So the budget deficit is projected to be 9.18 trillion in 2024. That is about 4.6 trillion down from the 13.8 trillion deficit in 2023. The proposed deficit represents about 50% of total federal government of Nigeria revenues, as well as 3.88% of the estimated GDP. This is quite a significant achievement, and this is a ratio that, in comparison with many in the world, we ought to be proud of ourselves. The projected level of deficit is partly attributable to the proposed salary review of federal workers, for which provision has been made, increased pension obligations, and increasing interest rates, which have caused higher debt service obligation. However, in spite of all that, at 3.88% of GDP, the projected level of deficit, though higher than the 3% threshold stipulated in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, but yet is significantly lower than the 2023 level of 6.11%. This shows that we are on our way to bringing deficits below 3% as provided by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Even though the Fiscal Responsibility Act recognizes, like with many countries, that government can exceed the 3% threshold justified by threats to national economy or in response to challenges in the international economy, most of which apply to Nigeria. The budget the proposed budget achieves an increase in capital spending over the 2023 level, which again is quite significant in view of the rising debt service. The critical allocations, among others, the education sector, were at least 2.18, about 2.2 trillion, which is about 7.9% of the federal government budget is allocated to education, which is higher than the 2023 allocation. Equally, this education allocation includes the provision of 50 billion naira for the student loans fund. This is in addition to what has been appropriated before in the supplementary appropriation for the take-off of the student loans fund. Equally, the health sector received an increase in to about 1.33 trillion, including immunizations. The coordinating Minister of Health impressed Mr. President and the Cabinet of challenges that are being faced in the pharmaceutical industry and thus the need for more funding to compensate and to help keep the sector in good stead. Equally, the defense and security sector received about 3.25 trillion, which is about 12% of the budget. This is quite significant, and especially following from the provision of close to 600 billion in the supplementary appropriation that was passed about 2 months ago to the defense and security sector. This confirms government's commitment to funding all security agencies and ensuring that the progress recorded is maintained and indeed improved upon. Equally, infrastructure spending, which is now 5% of the budget, and part of the instruction of Mr. President to the Cabinet is, as he has done in Lagos, bringing private sector into infrastructure. He has mandated all ministries to examine how to assess investors who are willing to put money in infrastructure. What the government can put in infrastructure is small compared to what the private sector can bring. So a number of roads, railways, the airports, and indeed a number of infrastructure projects in housing, power, aviation, they are all under consideration, and we'll see more of that. What the government funding does is to catalyze public and private investment. Social development program, you may recall that a loan of $800 million was obtained from the World Bank to support the social development and poverty reduction, as well as the appropriation of 400 billion naira in the supplementary. In addition to that, now the sum of 534 billion, which is earmarked for social development and poverty reduction programs. Thank you. In conclusion, the budget that was presented today to the National Assembly, and I believe was well received by the National Assembly and Nigerians, has been prepared against the backdrop of continuing global and domestic challenges. Overall fiscal risks have increased following weaker than expected domestic economy performance and structural issues in the domestic economy. Revenue generation, however, remains a major fiscal constraint to Nigeria's fiscal viability. However, the Presidential Task Force is working, and the results of the Presidential Task Force are yielding fruit. The management of the FRIS have been changed, and in addition to what the former chairman was doing, the very energetic new chairman, Zach Adedeji, has been improving revenue performance from the FRIS. The target is to increase the ratio of revenue to GDP from the current less than 10% to 18% of GDP. Efforts will continue to be made about post-tax collection, tax administration, collection efficiency, and overall budget efficiency. Government will make efforts to further contain financial leakages through effective implementation of key public finance management reforms. The President has warned the cabinet members that those who are not willing or able to support the renewed hope agenda will be shown the way out. The goal of fiscal interventions will be to further stimulate the economy through carefully calibrated regulatory and policy measures designed to boost domestic value addition, de-risk the enterprise environment, attract external investment and sources of funding. The ministerial realignments that were made by Mr. President in creating new ministries to take charge of specific areas, including creative economy, steel sector, the blue and maritime economy, and are all in an effort to ensure that we pay attention to those areas, and indeed all these areas have been funded in the 2024 proposed appropriation. Government remain mindful of the need to provide safety nets to cushion the impact of reform measures on the vulnerable segments of the population. We, as Mr. President, have prayed, we pray for an early passage, and with commitment we have always seen from the National Assembly and collaboration and cooperation with the executive, we hope that this implementation will commence from January 1, and it will further cement the macroeconomic gains that have been achieved under the bold, courageous efforts led by Mr. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. We welcome citizens' participation in enhancing budget implementation monitoring via the following platforms: iMonitor, Citizens Budget Monitoring App. Details of the 2024 budget proposal shall be available on the website of the Budget Office, www.budgetoffice.gov.ng. I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present details of the renewed budget 2024. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention.
I think he deserves a better round of applause. A lot of effort has gone into preparing this budget. I mean, for those of us who write market lists these days, and you see how you cross, you rewrite, you cross, you plus, you minus, then you understand how 6 months of intense hard work to put up a budget and then it's delivered today, and you just give a paltry round of applause because you think it's that easy. Please, could we give a resounding round of applause to our Honorable Minister of Budget and Economic Planning. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you have heard the budget presentation. Remember, when we started, in my rising and opening thoughts, I did say that the budget is not just a collection of numbers, but an expression of our values and aspirations. And when you look at the subheading, education, health, defense, infrastructure, social development, and poverty reduction, you now know where our values and aspirations are. Another round of applause, please. Time now to interrogate the presentation as we take questions from those on site and online. Questions, please indicate. Remember the rules of the question time, straight to the point, keep it short and simple, and know that there's someone else who's waiting. Introduce yourself, your name, and if you're in the media, which organization you write for. We'll start with the media who will report, and then we'll come to you, sir, if you don't mind. So, the gentleman in blue.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Kenneth Owe, and I work for the New Telegraph newspaper. Honorable Minister, sir, I'd like to commend you for the good work you've done on this budget breakdown. I'm interested in knowing what the Safe School initiative is going to be, considering what has been allocated to the education sector. Stakeholders are worried that initiative that is very, very important have not picked up with the speed expected. So with this budget, sir, where is that Safe School initiative project in this budget? Thank you very much, sir.
Kenneth, thank you. But please, in subsequent questions, please straight to the point, no explanations. The gentleman in white behind there, you please.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Please, could you introduce yourself properly again? You sound muffled.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, you are watching live images in Abuja. We just got the presentation of the 2024 budget breakdown from Abubakar Bagudu, Minister of Budget and Economic Planning of Nigeria. And of course, he just went through some of the metrics for the 2024 budget, which is the budget of renewed hope that was presented to the National Assembly earlier in the day. We covered that live from President Tinubu. And as you can see, the minister there is taking notes. To his right is Mr. Ben Akabweze. And of course, they are going to be taking notes and getting questions from the media on the 26.5 or 27.5 trillion naira budget.